and those values which I spent quite a bit of time talking about yesterday to the Goldfields Environment Management Group are embedded not just in our strategic plan, but also in our roles that we do, in our work that we undertake. And they are important for the way that we behave and we treat each other with respect. So our code of conduct is also very clear that we won't harass, bully or discriminate ever. And this behaviour will never be tolerated at the department. We want a safe and respectful environment for all our people. This is the first time that the department is celebrating Idahobit. It won't be the last. Our department has a very strong focus and support for promoting diversity and equality in the workplace and creating a safer place for all our people. I will speak briefly on the actions for the department later. But now, I would like to introduce you to our guest speaker, Bree. Having experienced firsthand the challenges faced by the LGBTQI individuals, both in the workplace and outside of work, Bree established the Queer Connection, a not-for-profit incorporated association which aims to bridge the gaps that exist within the community through education and awareness activities such as today's talk. During her transition, Bree worked for a company in the agricultural industry. Inclusion strategies were not in place at that time of her transition. However, she led the way in working with HR and senior management, ensuring everything went smoothly. Bree believes as an employer we can do much better. She believes a positive step forward is to demonstrate to you all and that she is openly proud to be a transgender and would like to share her story of what it's like to be a transgender woman. Please join me in welcoming Bree.
Thank you, Kelly. And thank you, Minister Dawson, for making the time to come out here today. And a special thank you to the executive team and the HR team as well. But also to each and every one of you for being here. This is a very important day on the calendar, and I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. As Kelly mentioned, I am a project manager within the Office of Government Chief Information Officer. And what I'll be speaking to you about today is the journey that I've been on before coming to the public sector, which has been a very rewarding journey in itself. If we just start with a little bit about me. So I have 4 beautiful school-aged children. They're wonderful, they're my world. I absolutely adore them. I'm a project manager. I was actually the project manager on wa.gov.au, and some of the branding and some of the work of the Service WA strategy you'll start to see coming out through the department. I'm also the chairperson and executive director for the Queer Connection. The Queer Connection is a not-for-profit incorporated association, and we do work across all areas of the LGBTI community, but also the wider community. There are still challenges out there, and since having marriage equality passed, which is a huge achievement and something that the whole community celebrated, we're now starting to look at where to next, and there are still some challenges out there. I work as a volunteer in our community. So the work I do for the Queer Connection, I don't get paid for. This is something that I've done my whole life. I was a St John Ambulance volunteer. I was even a volunteer firefighter at one stage. Volunteering in the community, or the sense of the community, is very important to me. Something that people find quite interesting is I'm also a qualified fuel injection technician. So what does that mean? I'm a mechanic. So that surprises people, especially when I show them my driver's license. It's a heavy, rigid driver's license. I can drive a 9-ton truck. So there's some interesting things that come out when I'm showing an ID and things like that. I also happen to be transgender, and I'm also a lesbian, and I'm proud of that. And I'm proud to stand in front of all of you and say how proud I am of that. Because we can achieve great things regardless of what our gender identity is or our sexual preferences. Idahobit 2018. This is a wonderful day, and it's a day that all of Australia, and even internationally, we stand against any type of discrimination against transgender individuals, gay, lesbian, intersex. This day was actually started from the World Health Organization changing the, believe it or not, homosexuality used to be classed as a disease. There was a time in history when it was. It's not anymore, luckily. And so we have today that was born from that and commemorates that significant occasion. These are quite frightening statistics that I'm about to show you. Up to 39% of individuals will not disclose their gender identity or their sexual identity in the workplace. You may say maybe some of those don't have a place in the workplace, and you might be right in some respect. But I ask, why do people hide it? What is the reason behind that? And it comes down to acceptance. If you imagine, if you support St Kilda and you sit in the West Coast Eagles area, you might stand out. And so you may not want to fly that flag. This next statistic is absolutely frightening. To have this percentage of individuals that will actually attempt suicide. I was actually one of those statistics. I was part of that. And so by speaking up and actually talking about, it's not something to be ashamed of. We are all who we are. We all have differences. And it's important that we accept all of those differences. I'll start with a little education. The word transgender, okay. So the word trans is actually, comes from a Latin origin, and it means across, beyond, that type of thing. When we think of a transatlantic flight, we go across the Atlantic. Gender is actually something that describes the characteristics that were built around society and culture. So gender identity is something that really we're brought up to understand and think about. We're born a girl, we're born a boy. We go down certain pathways, and socially, we get brought up that way. There are some of us, when the doctor held us up and had a look between our legs, they did get it wrong. This is actually the condition, I suppose, that this is referred to is gender dysphoria. Now, is there any psychologists in the room? No. So some people might know about the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Illness. There is a lot of debate about whether being transgender is a mental illness. The latter, or the current position is it's not. However, the word gender dysphoria, or the condition of gender dysphoria, is more around how we feel when we look in the mirror and we see something that doesn't match what's up here. That creates a lot of trauma for people. And when we look at that statistic of the number of individuals that will attempt suicide, that's what it leads to sometimes. If I asked you, If you woke up tomorrow and you were the other gender, what would you do? Probably flip out. The healthcare for transgender individuals is actually guided by what's known as the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, or WPATH. And it's really good that we do have this. It provides guidance to health professionals, doctors, surgeons, to make sure that the healthcare that is provided to a transgender individual is in line with some form of standard. These are huge changes that people go through, medically and socially. And to have that support from psychologists, GPs, surgeons, it's very important. I look at these photos and it's actually quite hard to look at. Growing up, I was just your average kid, you might say. I was into skateboarding. I surfed. I'm a drummer. I play music. I had good friendships. A lot of them were females. But growing up, there were differences that I was noticing with my male friends. They seemed to be more interested in the number of girls they could sleep with. I was more interested in the number of shopping dates I could go on. I was good at sport, long distance running, high jump, believe it or not, my height. But I was a master of disguise. I really was. I hid so much from so many people. That picture in the top right, that's my mum and dad. They never knew. They actually passed away before I was able to come out and have that strength within myself to do that. That support and that openness. I grew up in a very loving family, but we didn't know anything about any of these things. I didn't. I was age 24 when I actually figured out things. The penny dropped for me. And I think it was my oh crap moment. I wanted to be something else. I wanted to be anything but what I am. But life was good. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. When I asked myself what was wrong with me, because I knew there was something different about me, I thought maybe I'm gay. I am now. Maybe I'm confused. Maybe I've got a mental illness or something. I didn't understand why I was so different to everyone around me. Why did I think so differently? Why was I not chasing all the girls to get as many of them into bed as I could, like all the boys were at school? Why did I value having a shopping day with my girlfriends over other things? It took quite some time for me to figure all this out. I mentioned age 24. That's a long time to grow up and not really truly understand a very important aspect of ourselves, which is who we are inside. Our gender identity is something that's ingrained within us. Many of you in the room probably would never question it. But a lot of us do. And a lot of us are brought up in a world that doesn't align to who we are on the inside. I have suffered depression. I'm not afraid to admit that I've experienced addiction with drugs and alcohol in my life. I've worked through all of those things. And that was part of my journey in getting through some of the trauma that I experienced as a child. And I mentioned before that I am in those statistics. I attempted suicide twice. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to have to go through the stigma that's associated with being transgender. But there was one thing that got me through all of this. And whilst I looked at those photos before and a tear came to my eye, it was actually me. I'm the one that got me through, because that person I was, I'm still that person today. I look a bit different. I sound a bit different. There's some physical attributes about me that are rather different now. But I don't hate that person. I might have at times, but I've come a long way in that. We always talk about choices. We all have choices in life. And we do. We all have a choice in everything we do. How we think, how we accept others. But I want you to ask yourself these three questions. Would you be prepared to risk your career for something? We all have passions. Sometimes following our dreams, maybe risking our careers. Would you be prepared to lose all of your friends, or potentially a good proportion of them? Possibly. I mean, we're all passionate about different things. Our friends may not disagree with some of the things that we're passionate about. Would you be prepared to risk losing your family? That was the hardest question for me. When I finally discovered what the difference in me was, which was the fact that I am transgender, I asked myself these three questions. And if I answered no to any of these, I wouldn't be here today. But I answered yes. And that last one was hard. I have 4 children. And to think, by making a change in your life, that you could lose all of that. It takes a bit. It takes a bit to do that. But one thing I didn't have a choice in is who I am inside and the fact that I am transgender. I wish I did have a choice. I would not wish it on my worst enemy. I really wouldn't. So just on that point, sometimes people do, well, there are opinions put out there that there is a choice. The only choice we do have is whether to do something about it. A transgender person, and I'll speak shortly about that, can live their whole life and not make any changes. They can deal with that in different ways. How I was dealing with that was through drugs, alcohol, depression, attempted suicide. Not healthy things. So what is transition? We talked about the meaning of being transgender, and we all know the meaning of a word called transition, maybe to change, to move from something to another. That's fairly accurate. That's what transition is really about. There's three aspects to transition. Medical. So medically transitioning requires you to see a psychologist and your GP. And I spoke before about the WPATH guidelines, and that's what guides our GPs, our psychologists and other professionals. And there's many things that you may do to medically transition. Hormones, surgery, behavioural training. But it's all about feeling more comfortable with yourself. And people, just like myself, will choose to do different things. Do you know we have current legislation in this state called the Gender Reassignment Act? And this is being debated at the moment, and we hope to see some change here. It provides someone like myself with a certificate to say that I am who I say I am, that I'm a woman. But when we talk about medical transition, not everyone wants to have surgery. And we start to talk about human rights and our own right to do with our body as we see, as we choose. There's a social aspect. Things like changing your name. Do you know we can all use a different name? We may not be able to get a home loan or do some more legal things with it, but we can have a preferred name. There's nothing wrong with that. And some people choose to do that. They may just go with a preferred name. Pronouns is a big one. So where we use Mr., Mrs., Ms., things like that. Believe it or not, that can mean a lot to an individual. And early on when someone does transition, you may be misgendered. And that can hurt as well. We talk about bathroom use. Now, when I first started my transition, I didn't look like I look today. But there was a point at which I needed to make a decision. Which bathroom do I use now? There is also an aspect of transition which is legal. These are things like legally changing your name. Things like your passport, your birth certificate. These are things about our identity, our legal identity. A preferred name is not going to get us through customs being called Joe if our passport says Mary. I mentioned before about the legislation around the Gender Reassignment Board. We hope to see some change in that area. Just to talk to you a little bit about what that process looks like. I chose not to go through it, actually. I didn't need it. in my personal view was I didn't want to have to front up to a Supreme Court judge in a boardroom with 3 other people, possibly 4, sitting around judging me on whether I'm a woman or not. And then to give me a certificate at the end to say I am. Well, I knew that. The key to this is not all transgender individuals will choose to transition. They may do some or all of these. For me, I chose to go through all of these aspects of my life and make those changes that allowed me to feel comfortable. I talk about the road to happiness, and there was a series of things that I had to do to actually be happy. Now, a lot of you in the room might think, well, start running, or build your friendships, things like that. Absolutely, that contributes to our mental health and well-being, which is very important, those social outlets. But there was things that I needed to do. My journey started, actually, it was around about 4.5 years ago now, or 4 years ago. It seems like another life. But there were things that I needed to start doing, and I made a choice. That was the choice that I had. I've spent over 100 hours. Now think about what 100 hours is. So let's think about leave. So leave, something we all like. I've spent 100 hours, so what is that? That's roughly nearly 3 weeks of 5-day weeks having electrolysis. Now, I don't know if anyone's going to admit to it, but has anyone ever had electrolysis? Do you know what this is? This is painful. This is really painful. They take a small, I don't know the full technicalities of what they're doing, but they're doing hair by hair. Unfortunately for a transgender woman, hormones are wonderful, but they won't get rid of facial hair. It's called androgynous and androgen hair, I think. But it won't get rid of it. So we spend so much time getting rid of it. And I'm now at a point where I've probably got the same concerns about facial hair that maybe other women in the room have. So don't worry, I'm with you. I got you. I've undergone 4 surgeries, and they were my choices. I chose to do this. And I did it across 3 continents. You might think, wonderful, you've seen some really beautiful places, and I have. I've been to Marbella in Spain, been to Thailand. The reason we travel for these surgeries is we don't have the specialist skills in this country. I underwent something called facial feminization surgery. So facial feminization surgery is actually something that is rather invasive. I went to a plastic surgeon over here, and he refused to do the surgery that I wanted. He said, what I can do for you, I can give you a nose job, and then we'll fill the rest with Botox and fillers. That's not going to cut it. So I went to Marbella in Spain at a significant cost to a specialist organisation called the Facial Team. And they specialise in facial feminisation surgery. And what facial feminisation surgery is, it's not about completely changing the way you look. It's about removing those harder things that happen during male puberty. Without going into too much detail, I have an incision across the top of my scalp. They pull down your forehead, shave your forehead, your orbital brows, nose, lip lift, chin, a lot. I didn't want to put a photo of me afterwards. I think I probably would have had to have given a disclaimer and said there's going to be some pretty horrific stuff in this. But I did. I looked like a car accident. I really did. I looked terrible afterwards. I also had, and the surgery that is available to us is absolutely amazing. I had hair implanted in here. Because if you imagine when we lift something, our hairline goes back as well. So the incision that they do over the top here removed a strip of hair. And whilst they're spending 6 hours and I'm under a general anaesthetic here, there's a whole team from France that are pulling out individual hair follicles. And as I'm coming out of surgery, I feel what feels like a hole. Well, I shouldn't know what a hole punch feels like on your skin, but it feels like they're punching something into your skin and they're inserting hair follicles. When I saw it, I was amazed, absolutely amazed. I've also had to have what they call a trachea shave. Now, no surgeon in Australia will touch me. Too much risk. Your vocal cords are right behind there. But there are surgeons who do this on a very frequent basis, but they're overseas. Other surgeries, I've obviously had breast augmentation surgery, and gender surgery was probably the most invasive. I won't go into too much detail about it. It's an incredibly invasive surgery. I won't kid you. I travelled to Thailand to do that. I did look within Australia. We do have, I think there's 2 surgeons, maybe based in Melbourne, who will do it. But when I look at the statistics of how much they do versus how much a surgeon in Thailand does, I prefer to use someone that's got a lot more experience in this. So when we have a surgeon here in Australia who does 15 of these surgeries a year, and we have a surgeon who I use, Dr. Suchodolski, who does 230 in a year, there's a massive difference. There's an art to some of these surgeries. This is something that people don't really think about. There is surgery to adjust your speech and how you talk and things like that. I looked into the surgery. Yes, it is expensive, but it's also very, very risky. I had surgeons that were worried about shaving my trachea. Well, we're talking about tightening vocal cords. One slip and you can lose your voice. I chose not to do the surgery and I did 6 months of speech therapy instead. And that is probably a very hard thing for a lot of transgender women. Hormones do not change our voice. For a transgender man, it does actually. Very interesting. And I was very surprised to see the difference in the different hormones that our bodies have and how they affect our bodies. But certainly, all the things that we go through during puberty, I went through again. So I've had 2. When you look at this figure, 110,000, what would a lot of people do with this sort of money? maybe a deposit on a home, an amazing holiday for the family, new car, pay off some debts. That's what I spent on transition, the costs. And that was my own money. That's a lot of money. I have 4 children to support. It would be good to see more of these things covered by Medicare. There'll be mixed views in the room around this, and that's okay. But at the moment, there's not. The things that I have access to are the things that you have access to. Okay, so a mental health care plan. So I can get a rebate on a psychologist and things like that. But when we look back and we see the statistics of the number of people who try to kill themselves, I wonder if it's money well spent if we could actually subsidise some of these surgeries and make it a little bit more accessible. This word coming out, it's really interesting because when we talk about coming out, even as gay, lesbian, you come out. And usually that's it. You do it once. And we're good to go, we move on. Up until quite recently, I found myself coming out numerous times. So when I would meet a new partner, I would always disclose to them my history. And that's a conversation that I've always had to have. Coming out at work was probably the hardest thing that I have ever done. I worked for an amazing organisation, Cooperative Bulk Handling. Some of you may know of CBH. Some of you may have worked as harvest casuals during harvest while you were studying or something like that. But it was an agricultural company. A little bit of a boys' club. We had a marketing team. It was a bit of a boys' club. But I worked with HR because when I came to them, I didn't come with a problem. I came to them with a solution, actually. In typical project manager style, I brought a Gantt chart, plan. We had comms ready to roll. I had a PowerPoint. They just went, thank you. That is wonderful. So that really helped, especially when you've got an organisation that doesn't have these things in place. They don't know what to do. What would you do? Someone comes to your department and says, I'm transgender, I'm transitioning. There's a lot of things that need to be looked at. How is that going to be accepted in the workplace? Of course, the broad statement is it needs to be accepted, but unless we make those executive level statements to say that we do accept everyone for who they are, you will still get passive aggressive behaviours in the workplace. One of these photos actually was a very happy day for me. When I got my new name tag and I got my new ID. That was actually I think about my second week of work, being my true self. I had a short bob, nearly a bob kind of cut. There was a lot of people that didn't get it. There was people that I used to run with in the marketing team that I didn't run with anymore. In fact, they didn't talk to me anymore. But I did have wonderful support from the company, and that came from the top. I was actually involved in working with the executive and board of CBH. They spoke to me directly and told me that they 100% back what I'm doing and will do everything that they can to make sure that this is smooth. And they did. When we talk about LGBTI workplace inclusion and diversity, they are important. And the work that the Public Sector Commission is doing, Giacinta is doing here today, or doing at the moment, is wonderful. The public sector is the largest employer in the state. So if we look at the statistics, quite possibly there could be someone in this room who is transgender. It is important that our policies and those statements are clear. I mentioned before about the Gender Reassignment Board. Now, I won't get too in-depth into legislation and acts. However, we are protected by the Equal Opportunity Act, 1984. And that has a reference to gender identity or gender history. Because I don't have a gender recognition certificate, I may not have a recourse to actually lodge a complaint if I was discriminated against. So fundamentally changing that legislation, not the Equal Opportunity Act, it's the underlying legislation which drives so much. It's an important step forward for us. But coming out at work and my journey at work was a very positive one. It really was. Whilst I lost some people, I gained so many. I talked before about social transition. The most important thing for me was my children. Do you know when I first transitioned or started transitioning, I had to make a conscious decision around my children and to protect them as best I could. That's every parent wants to do that. I worked closely with my psychologist and I developed a plan which helped with the conversation, age-appropriate conversation to my children. And I involved my children. I talked to them about, what do you want to call me now? My daughter actually said this to me. And that was important to me. Because I don't want the children to lose a dad. And I'm still a role model to them, and they still look at me in that way. I may look a bit different, but I still provide that love, that guidance. When I did come out, I lost most of my friends. I think I had one left. And that's hard, because you don't have anyone, you know, to go out with, to socialise with. I also lost 2 of my brothers. They no longer speak to me. I have 1 brother left, so I'm one of 4 children. I have 1 brother left. He's gay, by the way, so that's probably why he accepts me. But my other 2 brothers just walked away. They didn't want anything to do with me. They thought I was strange. I was weird. And that hurt. That really did. My parents had already passed away by this time. So I had already lost my parents. But there are a lot of transgender individuals who lose their whole family. And imagine what that's like at age 18 or 17. But my children really have been my biggest supporters. They really have. The things they come out with, it's beautiful. One of my happiest days is actually when this photo was taken. When I transitioned, I removed myself from the children's school to protect them, so that they didn't get bullied. Just last year, my son, Braden, invited me along to his Year 6. Graduation. That meant the absolute world to me. I talked about the legal side of things. Back in 2013, July 2013, the federal government did release some guidelines to all government agencies on the recognition of sex and gender. This was not just this came from the federal government, but this was to all government agencies. And the deadline for that was July 2016. Something, and I would assume that all agencies have complied with that. A good example of that is the Department of Transport. It was very easy for me to change my gender with the Department of Transport. That's a piece of ID. It doesn't say female or male or anything else on our driver's license. But in our systems, it does. I've talked about the Gender Reassignment Act and the need for me to have a certificate. Well, I have a passport. That's a legal document. And that says I'm a woman. And that was the federal government who made that process easy. Changing my Medicare was easy. And you might think, well, why is Medicare so important? So during transition, I needed to take some medication that would suppress testosterone. With an M on my Medicare, the only way that I could get that medication was if I was to put my hand up and say that I was sexual deviant. It's used in chemical castration in much higher doses. I just paid for it. But as soon as I was able to change it with Medicare, I then got access to that same medication because cyclosporine it's called. Some of the women in the room may have come across this. It's used for hirsutism, which is excessive facial hair or excessive hair growth. The legal process is really changing your name. That's quite straightforward to do over here. Birth, deaths and marriages. And I needed letters from my doctor to update my passport, Medicare and driver's license. We need to make things simpler at the state level though. So how are things different now? I smile. I'm happy. I don't think about killing myself. And that's a positive thing. I take great pride in being able to teach, or having been able to teach my children something very important. Never be afraid to be yourself. Absolutely. But it comes down to acceptance. Why else would we be afraid? I'm definitely more confident. I couldn't imagine standing up in front of all of you and showing personal photos that I generally don't look at myself. But now I am. I'm okay with that. And I stand up for others. And ultimately, I'm proud of who I am. We can all play a part. All of you coming here today, I thank you for that. That's a big thing, to come and just listen and learn. Hopefully you'll walk away with a little bit of understanding, maybe a lot of understanding. But ultimately, respect everyone. That's the only thing I expect in life. I have no other expectations. And then I'm not disappointed. Employers do need to ensure the appropriate protections are in place. And again, the policies, the strategies that we put out there, the statements that come from our executive team, these are powerful. Don't be afraid if you do hear something that you don't understand. Google's my best friend. I Google everything. But don't be afraid to Google some of this stuff. You might be amazed. If you are interested in what the surgery looks like, there is one version of it on YouTube that is an animation. It's a lot to watch, but you'll see how it's done. Tonight, the Isabel Lake Memorial Lecture, which is actually hosted by the Equal Opportunity Commission, is happening tonight at UWA. I encourage everyone to try and get along. I'll be there, so hopefully I'll see everyone there. Also, jump on idahobit.org.au. There is a lot of ideas about what people could do today. There's also, I believe there's a calendar of events on there, of ways to get involved in Idahobit. If you would like to find out more, don't be afraid to reach out to me. I'm an open book. I'm happy to answer any questions. Nothing will be offensive. They're my contact details. Certainly follow the Queer Connection and jump on our website as well. Possibly I'll share this in a minute, this presentation. Also, it's important to note DWER's EAP specialist support and the LGBTIQ helpline. When Cinnamon told me about this, I was so pleased to see this. This is a wonderful thing that your department is doing in this space. And I'm looking to DWER as potentially one of our leaders in this space, in the public sector, which is absolutely wonderful. that's all I have for you today. And I think I'm nearly on time, 10:30.
An opportunity to ask a few questions, if that's all right. So if we'll take a few minutes. If anyone has any questions for Bree?
Oh, yes. Yes.
I was wondering what you think of Caitlyn Jenner. Has that been something that's been positive for this issue or not? I'm sorry, I watched Keeping Up with It.
I'm glad that you bring it up. And I think it's a very important point, actually, because what we see in the media about transgender individuals, it's not what we like. I mean, we're real people, we have real jobs, we have families. Has it been positive? Personally speaking, no. The general consensus in the transgender community is probably would have been better if that didn't happen, but we have to respect that Caitlyn is transgender. Putting it onto a show and things like that, I don't know if it really did truly reflect what it's like. I mean, it's a struggle financially. That's not what most transgender people experience. Does that help?
Yeah, no, I was really interested because it's one of those things where, you know, yeah, there's so much with that whole thing, it's the whole money thing as well, and this is, I guess, what your answer is that, you know, there's like anything in role models, we have these images portrayed on TV that aren't necessarily healthy or good for us.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, and it certainly doesn't help with you know, advocating for some of the issues that transgender individuals do face in this country. Because if we all had bucket loads of cash, we'd probably be a little bit better off, but we don't. So, thank you. Yes.
Thanks very much, Bree, for the presentation and also for the unique opportunity Commissioner spoke tonight for the debate, which you're going to focus on intersex and people who identify as such, and we've had Tony Griffiths speaking there at UWA. So people are interested, go to the EOC website and you can get the details of that. But the other thing I think that is really important too, Bree, is that given that people can experience discrimination, particularly when they're transitioning, that it is really important that the Equal Opportunity Act itself does change.
Yes.
And certainly within the Commission, we've been lobbying for that for quite a lot of time, that we reflect the Sex Discrimination Act, which is a federal piece of legislation which gives identification to gender identity and how the person wishes to express it. And that is really pivotal. Now, the issue is that state public servants do not have access to use the Sex Discrimination Act if there was an issue. So we need to reflect a similar importance in gender identity.
Thank you, Diana. And it comes down to a term, actually, that's used in the Sex Discrimination Act, which is gender identity, and it's a more of a umbrella term, would you say, Diana? It's broad, you know, where we refer to gender history. Yes.
And thanks again.
Thank you.
Just looking at on page 6, you said that, you know, Caitlyn Jenner wasn't perhaps there was some media spotlight. In terms of some other media spotlights that have been on transgender and transitioning, the one that I've seen that actually was sort of focused in the US, and it was more younger children actually going to camps and learning more about, you know, just themselves and their identities and things. And another that I saw was sort of on adults and their process, and of course sort of focusing more on education maybe and also supporting them. But have you found that some of those media opportunities have been more helpful? Is that something that you think is better, or not necessarily better, but maybe more helpful, more education, more?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I believe those types of things are helpful. I recently worked with a school teacher who's 53 and gone back into the workplace. She's really quite scared about going back in there. I have a really dear friend who's 11 years old and she's transgender. And she is actually she just inspires me, just the way she glows and things like that. So certainly, the more that we can have exposure, and I understand that there's going to be different views around the appropriate level and things like that, and we saw that with what was known as safe schools and is now inclusive schools. The concept I really support of inclusive schools. The curriculum I'm not a full bottle of, but certainly children at a young age are telling us that they don't feel right about who they are. So breaking down some of those barriers and making it easier for the parents to work with PMH and things like that. Certainly it's a positive thing. We're not talking about having major surgeries like I've undergone at 11 years old. Absolutely not. But providing that support and that access, yes.
Just one last question.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask, thank you for the great presentation.
Thank you.
That kind of leads on from the previous question. In terms of the school community of your children, did you work with the teachers, the principal? Did you come out to the parents and say, why have you taken that opportunity maybe to educate?
No. I've separated from my partner, so we have shared care. She actually lives quite a distance away. I chose not to bring them into it, and that was a personal choice on my part. Is there an opportunity to educate? Yeah, I think there is. But I think the parent in me is just saying, not at the cost of my kids, which is a hard thing. It's just, as a parent, you want to protect them, you want to do everything, anything. And so I think I just sheltered them from that. They're hugely accepting, my children. But yeah, I didn't actually approach the school.
The other thing that you said, you know, to be inclusive, they probably learned heaps of resilience from seeing the struggles that
Oh, definitely.
really come out.
I look at them now and I'm amazed. Well, I shouldn't be. We all grow up. We all bring up wonderful children, don't we? But no, they're just really articulate. Their understanding of others. They're just four beautiful little people, and I'm really proud because these are the leaders that are going to go on and run this country.
Bree, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really pleased.
Thank you.
An amazing story, an amazing journey. I can't begin to imagine what it's been like. But to now go out and lead the community and promote, you know, diversity and equality in that, and at the same time protect your family, it's just an amazing journey. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So obviously a lot of people had meetings at 10:30. So we ran a bit over, but it was such an important presentation, and thank you so much, so engaging that. To speed you on a bit. Look, I do want to just take that opportunity to quickly highlight some of the great work and actions that are happening within our department at the moment, because the department is committed to promoting diversity and equality in the workplace and creating a safe place for all of our people. Firstly, Cinnamon and Helen from Human Resources are part of our equity and diversity group. They're part of an interagency LGBTQI workplace and inclusion network hosted by the Australian Taxation Office. We have a Yammer group, Diversity, That's pretty cool. Which was set up since March this year for LGBTQI staff and allies to network and support each other. Yeah. Fantastic work, thank you. A peer support network with a focus on diversity is being created. This network will have support officers and they will identify areas of interest or experience in which they are able to provide support to those staff who wish to speak to a peer colleague about diversity-related issues. As Bree mentioned, the department's EAP provider offers a LGBTQI specialist helpline, and since November 2017, all our staff members have had access to this support. There's flyers for this helpline, which I believe are at the door. Thank you. An option for staff to report their gender as male or female or other in HR Orion is being investigated and will be implemented by our workforce services, so that's great. The Joondalup building design includes universal access toilets, which are gender neutral and disability accessible. So that's the department is investigating further LGBTQI awareness raising and or training support opportunities through 2019, and I'll be very strongly in that space. Diversity focus at our department includes creation of a safe place in which all staff can participate in work and further their careers in an appropriate and safe manner. Prevention of unconscious bias and subsequent discrimination, and the promotion of inclusion through awareness. The Equity and Diversity Panel is preparing for the launch of the Public Sector Commission's Inclusion Guide and Transition Policy, so we really look forward to those being published. Awareness events such as today are an important first step for our department. I'd like to thank you again, Bree, for being here today and for sharing your story. Again, it was amazing, and as I said, I can only begin to imagine what it's like. Also like to thank our guests for being here today, and Mr. Wilson so much legacy earlier. Finally, and most importantly, I'll thank our tremendous safe and well and training teams for organising this event and for the continued great work you're all doing to ensure the wellness and safety for all of our people at DWR. Thank you to Odette, Eloise, Renee, and particularly to Cinnamon for your great work, all of the great work in bringing this together today. Thank you all, and please, if you still have time, come and join us for morning tea. Thank you.